John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9 says this. From Galilee, Jesus returned to Jerusalem to observe one of the Jewish feasts. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, there was a pool called in Aramaic, the house of loving kindness, surrounded by 5 covered porches. Hundreds of sick people were lying under the covered porches, the paralyzed, the blind, and the crippled, all of them waiting for their healing. For an angel of God periodically descended into the pool to stir the waters, and the first one who stepped into the pool after the waters swirled would instantly be healed. Among the many sick people lying there was a man who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that the man had been crippled for a long time. Jesus said to him, "Do you truly long to be healed?" The sick man answered, "Sir, there's no way I can get healed, for I have no one to lower me into the water when the angel comes. As soon as I try to crawl to the edge of the pool, someone else jumps in ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, pick up your sleeping mat, and you will walk." Immediately he stood up, and he was healed. So he rolled up his mat and walked again. Now Jesus worked this miracle on the Sabbath. Now to verse 14. A short time later, Jesus found the man at the temple and said to him, "Look at you now. You're healed. Walk away from your sins so that nothing worse will happen to you." This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. So good. Hey, collective, it is good to be in the house tonight. And I will not be sharing tonight. I actually invited somebody who's one of my favorite humans to actually share with you guys tonight. He is a man by the name of Peter Unger. Can we welcome Peter as he comes on up to the stage? Peter, I love you. This man gets to be my brother. And one of my fondest favorite memories is we were at a worship night before we were brother-in-laws. And the Lord has placed on my heart to pray for him. I barely knew him. I didn't even know his last name. And I said, "Lord, if you bring him close to me at this worship night, I'll pray for him." I look over, and the person standing right next to me was no one else but Peter, and we just cried on each other night. It was amazing. So this man, he didn't know I was going to gas him up this much, but this man, he's a phenomenal storyteller. He's a gifted follower of Jesus, and he's just a faithful husband and father. And I'm so excited for you guys to be able to hear from his wisdom and who he is. And I'm just excited to glean from it. So, Peter, we love you. Take away, my friend.
Amazing. And I just want to take a moment because very few people get the opportunity to stand up here and to share about Nick and Skylar's life. I've had the opportunity to be really close with them for the last several years. And I know a lot of people who, they move through life and it feels like nothing really changes in their life. How about you? And the thing I can say about Skylar and Nick is that we've got to watch behind the scenes, me and my wife Sierra, how much they've sacrificed, how much they've given up, how much they've done to fight for this space for all of us to be here. It's absolutely amazing, the life that they live. And I want you to know, if you don't know them personally, that the life that they live behind closed doors is just as beautiful as the example that they give when we come into this space. We are so honored to have them to lead this ministry, and I just want them to just know that we love you guys, and we're so grateful for everything that you do for us. I want to real briefly pray for us, and then I want to jump into tonight. Let's bow our heads. Jesus, we thank you so much for Collective. We thank you for this ministry. We thank you for what it means. And God, I ask for anyone who's coming into this space tonight who is struggling with the idea of belief. Thank you for a place where we can belong before we believe. Thank you for a space that is so inviting and so warm. Thank you for a place where we can ask questions and we can wrestle through what it really means to follow you and what it really means to be human. I thank you so much for your kindness and your goodness. And Jesus, I just ask that you would wrap each and every single one of us up in your love. That you would just remind us that we belong to you. That you would just, in this talk tonight, that you would just help us move through pain. That you would help us find purpose and find healing and truly know what it means to do life with you, to be loved by you, and to live a life that's transformed by you. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Several years ago, I found myself going on a trip to Lake Powell with a huge group of friends. It was about 100 college students. It was a really bad idea. thankfully, we had some adults, so they took care of the important things like water. And they made sure that we could get there, and we had all the logistics set up. And so if you've never been to Lake Powell, it's actually incredible. It's a part of the Grand Canyon that's made up of the Colorado River and Reservoir. And what it is it's a giant canyon and ravine that stretches for miles and miles of these red rock walls that are like skyscrapers. And you can actually find these sandbanks inside of Lake Powell, and you can park houseboats along them, and you can go through all these little ravines, and you can take like a jet ski, and you can go through all these S-curves until you end up like at a dead end. And it's absolutely incredible. Like if you've ever been to a lake, you've never been to a lake like this. And so we planned this big trip. I had co-founded an international travel and adventure club, and so this was one of the things that we did quarterly. And as we're going out on this houseboat, there's 100 of us, and we're driving out. It takes like almost 2 hours to get there. And we get to the sandbank. Most of the people are going to have to camp. And so everyone starts pulling out their camping supplies. Me, being the good leader that I was, decided that I was going to sacrifice my comfort to instead sleep on the houseboat in a bed while everyone else was on the beach. And so me and a group of people, we were on the houseboat. And I remember the first morning that we woke up there because it was 100 degrees and it was 8 a.m. And it was like, this is going to be a horrible day. And I went to the back of the deck. And on one side, we have these giant 36 packs of water from Costco. And they're stacked to the ceiling. I mean, I don't even know if it was enough water for 100 people, but it looked like a good amount of water. Looks like a good amount of hydration. On the other side was an equal amount of alcohol. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm doing math, and I'm not very good at math, but I'm like, this is a 1-to-1 ratio of alcohol to water. It's 100 degrees outside, and we're here for 3 days. This probably isn't going to be a good trip. And so we spent the day on jet skis, and people were playing on the beach and going on hikes. And at the end of the day, I'm at the top deck of the houseboat, and I'm talking with a friend. And just over his shoulder, while we're in the middle of a serious conversation, I watched my other friend collapse onto the ground. And everyone rivals around her and stands over her. Her eyes have rolled back into her head, and she's actually convulsing on the ground. And it becomes really clear really fast that we're going to need to get medical attention. There's no service. The radio's not working. It's 9 o'clock at night. It's pitch black because these walls in these ravines in this canyon, they climb hundreds of feet high. And so we're going to have to take the boat, but we don't have any lights. We don't have a floodlight on the boat or anything that could get us back safely. I remember running across the sandbar to all these other houseboats, people that we hadn't met yet, asking who has a light. And no one had the light that we needed. So me and my friend Cameron end up getting on to the front of the boat, a little boat with 4 other people, and we hold the strongest flashlights we can find off the end. And we take off through the canyon, 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 at night. And our friend, she's still not conscious. And we're zipping through this canyon. And me and Cameron are just holding on to our lights, just trying to direct the driver so that he doesn't crash into the walls. And several times, he's still not able to turn fast enough, and we end up crashing into the wall, denting up the boat, and then taking off again. It's ironic to be standing in a place where you're fighting to try to help your friend live, but you might actually die. And it was this thematic moment in my life that then ended with us getting cell service, talking to paramedics, and it was crazy. They call in a helicopter, and they shine this floodlight on us to guide us all the way back through to an upper dock where there was actually a medical center. So about an hour after all of this, we finally get to the medical center. She gets the attention that she needs. They get her hooked up to an IV. They run some tests, and it becomes very clear very quick what happened to her. She's got alcohol poisoning. She also has heat stroke. She's severely dehydrated. And the friend of hers who was kind enough to give her a homemade brownie might have cooked some extra ingredients into it. So multiple things are going on with her. And I just remember when she finally came to, she literally sat up and she said, "How did I get here?" And she was so confused. It had been hours, and it's how weird to wake up in a place completely different from the one that you were in before. And we started putting the pieces together for her and her explaining to her exactly what had happened. And she was amazed that she had missed that much life just in a matter of hours. And I've never forgotten that question that she asked and how frantic she was when she asked it. How did I get here? Because I think it's a question that so many times we end up asking in different areas of our life. Sometimes you wake up just in a moment and you realize, how did I get to the place that I'm at right now? I mean, it's crazy how fast life can change, isn't it? How life can be so wonderful. Life can be full of so much joy. And one phone call, one text, one moment, one situation, everything can change. And then your life is completely rerouted, and you're somewhere where you've never been before. It can feel so disorientating, like being on a beach and deciding to get in the water and to float, and then closing your eyes and opening them a few moments later, and you're completely in a different space, and you've drifted off. And there's always this frantic feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to swim back. And this is the tide of life, is that what pain will do to us is it will actually pull us out, And it will take us to a place that we're not used to. It will change our position. And in that, we'll then have to find our way back. But if you've ever been out in the ocean and you've been caught in a riptide before, then you know that when you're fighting an undercurrent and you're trying to work your way back, you're making absolutely no progress. And all of a sudden, something that was so simple for you a moment ago, like breathing, becomes so difficult. It completely shifts your perspective. And this is what can happen to us, is that we find ourselves so far off course from where we initially were, in a completely new place, just fighting for simple things. I mean, when you go through something really difficult in your life, it can truly feel like survival is just the ultimate goal, and everything else in life can feel so much bigger than you. And I think the lie that we can start to believe in a moment like this is we believe that we're fighting to live, but really we're just fighting not to die. I mean, that's really what survival is. And I think the problem with pain sometimes is that it overstays its welcome. I mean, have you ever felt like the beautiful moments in your life, like they're here for a moment, and then the difficult challenges and circumstances, they move in until further notice? It just feels like so many times, like the beauty in certain seasons of my life has only lasted for a moment, followed by like so much pain. And if it hasn't happened to you yet, it's going to happen eventually, because we're all going to go through something that's going to change us. And you find yourself saying things to move through it like, time heals all wounds. And the truth of it is that time doesn't heal anything. It just puts distance between you and your pain, but you still carry it into your future. And it's in spaces like this that we start asking questions like, how did I get here? Why am I still stuck on this? Why does this still haunt me? Why can't I get over this? Why can't I move forward in my life? And I think when we find ourselves in this place, sometimes the hardest thing is just trying to figure out how to get out. You see, the reality of pain is that there's certain kinds that will leave you paralyzed. It'll put your life on hold. It will shift your perspective, and it can even suffocate the hope that you have for the future. And it's not always physical pain. Sometimes it's mental, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's spiritual. But there's this moment in the life of Jesus in John chapter 5 that Nick just read from, where he encounters this man. And I want to read this to you one more time. It says, from Galilee, Jesus returned to Jerusalem to observe one of the Jewish feasts. Inside the city near the sheep gate, there's a pool called in Aramaic Bethesda, or here we have the house of loving kindness. Surrounded by 5 covered porches, hundreds of sick people were lying under the covered porches, the paralyzed, the blind, and the crippled, all of them waiting for their healing. But an angel of God would periodically descend into the pool to stir the waters, and the first one who stepped into the pool after the waters were swirled would instantly be healed. Among the many sick people lying there was a man who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that the man had been crippled for a long time. Jesus said to him, "Do you truly long to be healed?" The sick man answered, "Sir, there's no way that I can get healed, for I have no one to lower me into the water when the angel comes. As soon as I try to crawl to the edge of the pool, someone else jumps in ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, pick up your sleeping mat, and you will walk." Immediately he stood up. He was healed. So he rolled up his mat, and he walked again. Now Jesus worked this miracle on the Sabbath. And I don't know about you, but this moment, it happens so fast that it's easy to miss what's actually going on. You see, when I first read this, I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily relate to this group of people. We're told that there's paralyzed people, there's crippled people, there's blind people, and these are just things that I've never had to deal with in my life. But when I really take a look at this story and you really look at this place that people are going for healing, people are so broken, I think it becomes more relatable to who we are. Because then I realize I actually do relate to all of these people. Because I've been paralyzed by fear in my life. How about you? I've been crippled by anxiety. I have been blinded by hate. And I think we actually have more in common with this people group than we think we do. You see, I think it's interesting to look at this and to realize that this area that they're meeting in to try to find their healing, this is the way that most of us show up for life, for ourselves. And we live in a culture where it's so easy to become so self-absorbed. I think when you go through hard things, you become protective of your life, and you end up keeping other people out, or you just don't feel like you have the energy to maintain relationships. I don't know if you've ever been there before. But it can be so hard just to find human connection when you're struggling with your own things, just to be a support to other people. And I think so many times we show up in our lives for ourselves, first and foremost. I mean, here's a group of people, and they're all in this space, and they're just looking for their own healing. They're just there for them. And this is what communal isolation looks like. I mean, we live in a time that's so interesting. You can sit in the middle of a Starbucks. You can be surrounded by people having conversations, and you can be completely and utterly alone. You can come to church. You can listen to a talk. You can go home and have had no human connection. I think the big one for me is like being in an airport. Everyone has a destination in mind, and absolutely no one is concerned with anyone else. It's just like you are an obstacle. And I've been an obstacle many times in an airport, pretty big obstacle. But I have been the one that gets bumped and gets ran by, and people who aren't even in a hurry. I have seen the guy, what a bummer. I have seen the guy who ran past me like he was in a hurry to then like find him walking just like scrolling on his phone. I'm like, that was all for nothing, dude. It's the guy that like gasses it to the stoplight, 60 miles per hour, 10 feet before. Good job. But I think in this moment, it's like there's hundreds of people, imagine, under these covered porches, and they're all sick, and yet they're all completely alone. How weird is it that we can be surrounded by people, and yet we can be completely alone? And I think that the tragic thing in this is that everyone here is uniquely disadvantaged. See, they believe that the only thing that's going to heal them is these waters when they're stirred. And yet they're paralyzed, so they either can't move, or they're blind, so they can't see when the water's stirred, or they're crippled, so they crawl and they have a fighting chance to even make it to the water. Last week, Sierra and I went to a little arcade, and we were playing all the different games. We had a date afternoon. And, of course, I always try to avoid the claw machine, but I ended up at it because Everett loves stuffed animals. He calls them stuffies. I think it's like from Peppa Pig or something, some like English show where they call them stuffies. And I was like, I'm going to win that for Everett. So I invested. I spent $1. And, it's amazing. I know you probably won't believe this, but I almost got it. So, like, it pulled it up, and then it kind of did this, and then it dropped it. And I just knew that if I did it one more time, that I was going to get it. So I did it again, and I did it again, and I didn't get it. I went broke doing this. I spent all $4 I had coming into this. I mean, a complete waste of ROI. And I didn't walk away with a toy. And I think so many times in life, like we try to play the lottery of life, of like, I am going to buy a ticket and hope that I'm the grand winner. And we're completely disadvantaged to win. And this is a group of people who have no fighting chance to actually get to the water. How tragic. And I think the interesting thing is in the language, it says that they were waiting for their healing, which really means that everyone here is just waiting for their life to begin. They haven't actually started living yet. You see, this was probably most likely a pagan pool, and everyone's belief system there, it's rooted in superstition. And so they thought that an angel would come and swirl the water, and that the first person to step in would be healed. Can this be confirmed? Not necessarily. Can this be denied? All you have to do is ask enough people. You see, the tragedy here is that most likely what was going on is that there was an underground, subterranean stream that ran under the pool to keep the water moving. And every once in a while, enough water, enough air would push through that it would cause the waters to move. So you have hundreds of people waiting for their life to begin, thinking that an angel of God or of a God is coming to swirl the waters, and no one's coming for them. You see, in most translations, you actually don't find verse 4. It just goes from verse 3 to verse 5. But then the context of him telling Jesus, no one will carry me to the water when it's stirred, it doesn't make any sense. So I think it's important for us to know this. And wouldn't it be a tragedy to live your life believing, banking that there was something that was going to change everything for you, and it was just a superstition that you had? I mean, don't we all have our own superstitions? And so I want to pay attention to 5 things tonight. And the first is, I want you to see how Jesus meets you in your pain. How Jesus encounters this man. It says, among the many sick people lying there was a man who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that the man had been crippled for a long time. Jesus said to him, do you truly long to be healed? I know a couple things about pain, just from my own life. One is that it's inevitable. You see, Jesus says in John chapter 16, he says, in this world you will have trouble. So we're giving context that there's no way to get through the human experience without some sort of pain, without some sort of brokenness at some point in our lives. And Jesus actually lived 33 years to give us this example, to show us that even a human life like Jesus' that is so perfect, he is known as the man of sorrows. That Jesus went through loss, he went through grief, and he went through so much brokenness just like we do. And so I want you to know, first off, is that God's not waiting for you to get out of your pain. God understands it, God empathizes with it, and God sees you in it. It's just not the place that he wants to leave you. The thing about pain that's so hard is that we're all going to find ourselves paralyzed at some point in our lives where we cannot move. You're going to find yourself crippled where you feel like anything outside of just eating food and drinking water and getting sleep just feels like it's above and beyond your capacity. You're going to have times where you feel absolutely blind to what's next in your life, where you have no idea what's around the corner, and it just feels like everything is so unpredictable and everything is just so unknown. And the thing about pain is that it's also valid. Like, if you hear enough people's stories, you'll realize that like everyone has a reason to explain why they've gotten to where they've gotten to. And like, how can you argue with someone else's experience? Everyone's pain is valid, and we're all going through some form of it. But time does not equal healing. When we put space between us and an event or a moment, and we bring it into our future, it stays with us and it still continues to shape us. I want you to know that healing is not incidental. Healing is intentional. And healing actually takes action. And I think the lie of pain is that pain will convince you and pull you to a place where you will actually neglect yourself and you will choose not to get better. You'll bury it because it's hard to move through. And this is the problem with brokenness, is that it will convince you that it's just personal, that it's not affecting anyone else. And this is actually a lie that pain tells us in our life, is that what is going on in my inner world doesn't affect anyone in my outer world. But the truth is that every jagged edge that has wounded you will eventually become an edge that's facing outward from you that you use to hurt other people with. Have you ever heard the phrase, hurt people, hurt people? There's so much truth to it. That like we will wound other people even without trying if we don't deal with the things that we're going through in our own lives. So Jesus meets you in your pain, but he doesn't leave you there. The second thing that we can see is that he challenges your position. Jesus asked this man, do you want to be healed? He knew that he had been crippled for a long time, and he asked him, do you want to be healed? I mean, have you ever been asked a question where the answer just seems so obvious? Like, what do you think I want? Why do you think I'm here? I mean, I remember when I was 12, I probably asked the most obvious question in the books. I was on a trip, dirt biking with some friends and my dad, and we were transitioning trails, and we were on the gravel, and I was going almost 40 miles per hour just trying to keep up. And we're in this deep rush and all this tree cover, and I come to this like fixed, like 90-degree right-hand turn. And I want you to know, if you've ever ridden a dirt bike, street bike, anything like that, you cannot make a turn at 40 miles per hour. I tell you this from experience. It doesn't work. So what happened was, of course, the bike slid out from under me. I rolled and I rolled and I rolled, and the bike landed on top of me. And the guy who was behind me, he stops, and I just remember seeing this look of terror on his face. I'm full of shock. So I stand up, and I show him my arm with all the bone fragments sticking out from different angles. And I ask him, do you think it's sprained? And he looks at me, trying not to laugh. He's like, yeah, I think it's sprained. We should go to the hospital. And we were like 8 hours within a hospital, so once the shock wore off, I was in a ton of pain. But I think in this moment, it must be so frustrating for this man to be asked this question. He's been sitting there maybe for 38 years looking for healing. And Jesus asked him, do you want to be healed? I mean, isn't it so clear that's exactly why I'm here? I could just imagine that in his own mind, he's just thinking, that's exactly what I want. That's all that I want. I'm waiting for my life to begin, but Jesus is saying, no, you're waiting for your life to end. My wife and I, we have a friend who has been sick for a couple of years, and she's gone to different medical facilities all around the U.S. Her parents have spent tens of thousands of dollars for different types of treatments, and she never used to have anything wrong with her, and now she can barely get out of bed and live her life. And the hard thing about this person is that she used to be full of so much life, and now it seems like she's struggling with just existing in every aspect of her life. But every time that she goes and she finds an answer that will potentially lead her to healing, she will get a medication, she will get a supplement, she will get an herb, she will get something prescribed to her, or she'll get a plan put in place, and she always quits a few days into it. And the reason she told Sierra she does this is because it causes a new kind of pain, that when toxins start expelling themselves from her body, it's uncomfortable for her. And so she'd actually rather live with the pain of whatever is causing the sickness inside of her body than to try to get to the other side of the solution. And I've watched as this has impacted every area of her life, as she's gone from being someone who was for other people in everything, and now she is just completely self-absorbed. And that's a problem, is like pain and brokenness in our lives, the way that it manifests is it creates a life that becomes utterly self-absorbed. And so I think when Jesus is asking this question, what he's really asking is, I know it looks like you want to be healed, but do you actually want healing? Is that actually why you're here? And so there's a question behind the question maybe. You know, in 1 Kings 19, a prophet of God named Elisha, he has one of the biggest moments in his life. Fire comes down from heaven, God shows up, something amazing happens, but then he ends up threatened the next day and ends up running out into the wilderness and asking God to kill him. He ends up asking to die. And he eventually ends up in this cave, and God asks him this question 2 times over. He says, what are you doing here? And the question isn't about his geographical location. The question is about his soul. It's about his inner world. What are you doing here? What are you doing in this place? And I think what Jesus is asking behind the question is, why are you here? This pool, it has nothing for you. It means nothing for you, but you're still here. Why? And so Jesus asks him, do you want to be healed? And what's funny is he doesn't even answer the question. He then just goes into an explanation of why his life is the way it is and how he can't find a solution. But I just want to ask, for you, what do you think is your pool? What do you think is the space that you've taken up, the position that you fought for to say, my life will not begin, my life will not matter until blank, until this happens? What's the thing that you've waited by thinking, my life, it's not going to matter until I have financial security. It's not going to matter until I'm known, until I'm famous. It's not going to matter until I'm married, until I find the person that I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life with. It's not going to matter until I get the job that I want. It's not going to matter until I can move away. My life isn't going to matter. It's not going to start until I get exactly what I want in life. And I think so many times this is our pool. This is the space that we wait by. We wait for our life to be changed by an event, by a moment, by a person that we think is going to fix everything and finally bring joy into our life. And the truth is it's the same as bubbles stirring water. It actually doesn't mean anything. And Jesus is saying, I'm the only one who's going to be able to come into your life and you're actually going to be able to see it change. You see, when you choose to sit and wait for your future, you actually relinquish the freedom to walk into it and to step into it. Life is not waiting for you on the other side of that one thing that you've convinced yourself is finally going to make you happy. It's finally going to bring purpose and joy and significance and meaning to your existence. All of it, it's on the other side is regret. From time wasted and believing the lie that my life is not going to matter until this happens. And it makes it so that it's hard for us to even enjoy life. It makes it so that it's hard for us to celebrate other people. I mean, do you know someone who can't celebrate anything in anyone else's life because they don't have it themselves? And I've been the person who I'm happy for everyone once I have it. I just am not happy for them until I get it. And that's really the position that we take up a lot of times. But life isn't waiting for you on the other side. So what is your pool? What is the thing in your life that you've convinced yourself of? This is going to be when my life truly matters. And so Jesus asks, do you want to be healed? A question he not only asked this man, a question that he asks every single one of us. And not before we cross the line of faith and choose to trust him with our life, but even after we cross the line of faith and choose to trust him with our life. Jesus is asking, do you want to be whole? The literal translation of this sentence is, do you want wholeness? And I think so many times, our language, it betrays us because Jesus says things like, I've come to give you life and life to the full. And later on in this chapter, he even says, I've come so that the dead may have life. And we think to ourselves, well, Jesus, I already have life, so what else do you have to give me? And we kind of skip over the millions of times that Jesus says, I've come to give you life. I've come to give you life. And I think what we really don't understand, because our language betrays us, we're saying the same thing, but we're not saying the same thing. Because what Jesus is actually saying is, without me, all your life is existence. It is the epitome of living life in black and white. And what I want to do is I want you to see life in color. I want to open your eyes. I want you to know what it means to be truly alive. I mean, have you ever met someone who's truly alive? They're just full of energy and they're full of life and something's different about them. And I think this is the example that we can be to the world around us is by understanding the one that lives inside of us, is that the God of the universe lives and dwells inside of you if you have trusted him with your life. And we should walk in our lives and be the example that Jesus is real in the world. Because our life is so vibrant. There's a difference between being fully alive. There's a difference between that and just existing. And that's what Jesus is talking about. And so maybe the reason why you don't feel like you've heard from God in a while, because I've been in that space before, maybe it's just a matter of going back to the last thing he told you. Because sometimes we're not ready for the new information because the last thing that God has said to us is something that we've ignored or we haven't answered back to. Or maybe the reason that nothing's changed in your life is because Jesus has asked you this question and you haven't answered him back with yes. I want to be healed. I don't just want to stay in this place. I mean, for this man, healing meant responsibility. Healing meant going and finding a job. Healing meant not being financially supported by other people. It meant not being able to sit around. It meant it was going to require new responsibility. And so many times, we want the outcome of the life we think we want. We just don't want the responsibility associated with it. We don't want to do any of the hard work to get there. We just want the outcome. See, I want a perfect marriage, and I want to find someone who checks every single box, but I'm not willing to work on who I am in the meantime. I'm not willing to become that kind of person. I want other people to show up in my life because I don't feel loved, but I'm not willing to step into anyone else's life and be an example of love to them even when I don't feel like I have it in my own. There's so many examples in our own lives where we want what we want, and we don't actually want to do the hard work to get there. But Jesus doesn't just meet you in your pain. He doesn't just challenge your position. He doesn't just shift your perspective. He invites your participation. So before I talk about that, your perspective, how does Jesus shift your perspective? The sick man answered, "Sir, there's no way that I can get healed, for I have no one to lower me into the water when the angel comes. As soon as I try to crawl to the edge of the pool, someone else jumps in ahead of me." And it's so interesting. Like, he's only got one way that he can actually get better. The only way that things are going to change for him in his life is if he gets down to this pool. And so when Jesus says, "Do you want to be healed?" he doesn't even answer the question yes or no. All he says back is, "I just need to get to the water. Like, if someone would just get me to the water, then everything would be better. My life would be better." And this is the problem with what pain does in our life. Because when your pain is all-consuming and your position really just becomes a prison, a lot of times your perspective becomes incredibly pessimistic. And in my own life, I can identify that when I'm unhealthy, I'm incredibly negative. How about you? Like, naturally, I'm very idealistic, very vision-focused. I don't really care much for pragmatism. I'm the kind of person in a meeting who has all the ideas. And my worst enemy is the person I'm just like, and then I think it would be amazing if we didn't know. And how cool would it be if no? What do you think about no? See, that's the person that I may or may not run over with my car when I get to the parking lot. Because I'm so against the person who wants to make sure we can figure out the details. Want to make sure that we can make it a reality. Because you're crushing dreams. You're just a dream crusher. But when I'm unhealthy in my own soul, in my own spirit, then when my wife comes to me and says, "Hey, you have today off, let's go," no. What do you think about taking a kid? No. Do you want? No. And I become that exact person that I do not get along with inside of a meeting. Because I think our worldview becomes so small when we're going through pain, when we've planted our flag and said, "This is where I will find the answer to my problems," and we're wrong. And when our perspective in that moment becomes so small, we become incredibly negative. I think another thing is that, like, crossing the line of faith and trusting Jesus with my life, I've realized over the last several years that a lot of people will talk about a hard time that they go through as like a desolate desert season. I think we've all been there at some point in our lives. And I'm just going through the desert season, man. And like a lot of times the language of it is like they're comparing themselves to Jesus. I mean, we don't really say that, but like you're like, "Oh yeah, like Jesus, like, came out of the waters of baptism, walked straight into the wilderness. Jesus was tested, he was tempted, but he came back and he was ready for life. He was ready for ministry." That's what's going on with me right now. God just got me in like a really desolate, like really, really desert-like place, but he's bringing me back. What we don't realize is that while Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, there was in the past a people group who were in the wilderness for almost 40 years. And while Jesus was listening to the call of God, this group of people had ignored the call of God. And they found themselves wandering out in the middle of nowhere. And I think what we do oftentimes is we confuse our deserts. You see, if you ask the people around you, you'll get the truth. Because they'll tell you, "You've been in this desert place for a long time. Have you ever turned around and started walking back to community and out of isolation? Is your life gotten any better? Do you look like a changed person, or does everything look exactly the same?" Because if it does, then you might not be in a desert being refined. You might be in a desert just wandering. And so Jesus, he challenges this man's perspective, and he tries to shift it, and he tries to move him from a place of blame, because the language he uses, he says, "As soon as I try to crawl to the edge of the pool, someone else jumps in ahead of me." And I can sense the bitterness, the resentment, the anger towards other people. And I think this is what happens when your worldview becomes really small, is that you feel like you lose absolute and utter control. And then you just find yourself in this place where you just blame other people, or you blame yourself, or you blame God. And when you're in this space, everyone is against you. Do you have that friend who's like just a victim of every circumstance? Like every story they tell is like creatively designed to lead you back to the reality that they have just been set up to fail in their life, and that everyone is against them, and that no one is for them, and that everything is just like about them. Because if you don't know that friend, you are that friend. And like when you're a victim in every area of your life, what you don't realize, because you have such an easy out, is that you've actually relinquished your freedom to have responsibility of your life, to actually own your choices. Some of us, we just need to go back to like kindergarten for this. Like we just need to learn a couple simple phrases like, "I own that, I'm sorry, that's on me. It feels really good to take responsibility in your life. It feels really good to stop thinking that life is happening to you and to realize that life is actually happening for you. Your perspective in life, it determines the quality of it. If you find yourself struggling with pessimism, struggling with negativity, find out if a healthy life still makes you think that way. And if it does, then it's just a matter of changing the way that you think and the way that you see the world. Like when you look out the window, do you see the sunset or do you see the specks on the window? Because we all know that person that just sees the specks. They just see everything wrong with the world, nothing that's right with it. And what Jesus is calling this man into, what he's calling us into, is a life of responsibility where you say the good and the bad things that have happened in my life, I take responsibility for them. I'm not going to shift blame. I'm not going to put this on anyone else. And I'm not going to think that I'm the one person who was born who is just being abused by circumstances in life, that people are just against, that everyone's just getting behind me in a circle and they're negotiating before the day starts how they're going to ruin my life. Because it's not the reality, but it is exactly how life can feel when you live in a space of blame. Jesus doesn't just meet you in your pain. He doesn't just challenge your position. He doesn't just shift your perspective. He invites your participation. Jesus says to him, stand up, pick up your sleeping mat, and you will walk. Immediately he stood up. He was healed. So he rolled up his mat and he walked again. Now Jesus worked this miracle on the Sabbath. I love this story because so many aspects of Jesus' life that we're given are stories of healing, where he goes to someone and he heals them and their life is forever changed. But in this moment, he asked for this man to participate. And I think the orthodoxy of our faith that so many times we've been taught is to live this passive faith, this passive theology. And I want to challenge you with a new idea, which is active theology. You see, as I'm reading through the scriptures, sometimes there's just stories that I don't like. How about you? I mean, I know we're not supposed to say that, but like, I don't really like Gideon's story, okay? Like, meet me in the back about this. Because Gideon is called by God, and then Gideon proceeds to test God. And I love that God is so patient, God is so kind, God is so loving, and he is with every single one of us. But I just can't get behind it. He's like, here's a wet rag. Like, while it's dry outside, make this thing wet. And then he's like, okay, cool, you did that, God. You're definitely real. But could you make it dry when it's wet outside? Do the opposite? Do a little switcheroo? And it's like, I think what I want in my life is I want to participate in the future that God has for me, and I don't want to get left behind. And I love that Jonathan, son of Saul, King Saul, best friend of David, shout out to the homie. Jonathan wakes up in the middle of the night in the middle of a war that his family is losing. And he's got one of two swords out of an entire army, not good odds. And he wakes up to his armor bearer and he shakes him awake and he says, come, let's go up to the outpost of those uncircumcised Philistines. It's ancient trash talk. And he says, perhaps the Lord will intervene, for he can save whether by many or by few. What this translates to is, if God doesn't show up, we're going to die. And hopefully he does. He can do whatever he wants. And so they climb up. The odds are against them. And it says that they take the fight to these Philistines, and God does what only God can do. He brings about a supernatural event, an earthquake, that causes confusion among their camp. And it says that the Israelites, they catch the Philistines on the run. And it says that the people in their army who had been left behind, who had hidden in caves and who had even joined the Philistines, that they crawled out of their caves and they joined the fight and they won the battle that day. And I love that Jonathan just says, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to do something. And I love that he just gets up and he has the courage to say, I'm going to do something that I think is going to be good. And hopefully God will meet me in it. Hopefully God will show up, because if he doesn't, then we're going to die. And it takes so much courage to live this kind of life that if you take a step and God's not there, you are going to fall. But I love this active theology that the story of Jonathan promotes. And I think this is what Jesus is asking every single one of us, because he comes to this man and he says, stand in your pain and be healed in this moment. I need your participation. Jesus never asks you to wait. He asks you to follow. Every single call of the disciple was, come follow me. And he doesn't just ask you to follow, he eventually asks you to leave. Because he said, I'm going, and the helper's coming, and I want you to go and I want you to tell this message to the entire world. The call of Jesus is not just one to wait for your life to begin, it's one to follow him. You see, when you activate your faith, you actually become an agent for change in the world. You see, I think it's so tragic to watch that so much of the history of the church, while full of so much beauty, is also full of men and women who have waited for God to give them permission to do good, all while evil men and women continue to destroy and ruin the world generation after generation, waiting for permission from no one to destroy the world. And I think what we need to understand is when we cross the line of faith and when we choose to trust our life to Jesus, he actually changes your inner world. We're told that we lose the heart of stone. We're given a heart of flesh. Paul tells us that God is actually renewing your mind, that he's giving you the mind of Christ so that you can understand the thoughts of God, that the Holy Spirit is living inside of you, changing you from the inside out. And what this means is that the very essence of who you are is being transformed. And that there comes a point when you cross that line of faith, when you give Jesus your life, when you actually allow him to change things inside of you, that you desire good things. Like among all the bad, you also desire to do really good things. And we don't give credit for those things because we're waiting for God to give us permission. But if you don't know what to do next, just do the next good thing you know, because it's better than doing nothing. People that are ruining the world are not waiting to be given permission to do so. So the process of healing for us can practically be found in Jesus' command. He tells him, stand up, pick up your sleeping mat, and you will walk. And what you and me can read this is stand in your present, pick up your past, and carry it into your future. Because we are committed many times to sitting in our pain. We need to stand in our present. We need to stand in our pain. This is where God wants to heal you. But the second thing is when he asks him to pick up the mat, I think there's two things he's really asking him. First is he's saying, you're not coming back here. You're not coming back to this place, so bring your mat with you. His mat represents his past. His mat represents the place that he's waited for healing and how God has made it a reality in his life. And many times we are afraid to carry our past into the future because it is weighed down by so much guilt and so much shame that it is weighed down with regret and pain. But Jesus wants you to know that if you choose to carry your past into your future, it will be an example to everyone you walk by that Jesus has changed your life because you're no longer laying on the mat. Jesus doesn't want to just meet you in your pain. He wants to challenge your position. He wants to shift your perspective. He wants to invite you to participate in the life that he has for you and the future that he has for you. One of the things I want to do before we leave is I want to show you guys a quick clip from the show The Chosen that actually illustrates this moment. I just want you guys to see the beauty of how Jesus encounters this man and see it brought to life visually. Let's take a look at this clip real quick.
Shalom.
Me?
Yes.
Shalom.
I have a question for you.
For me. I don't have many answers, but I'm listening.
Do you want to be healed?
Who are you?
We'll get to that later. But my question remains.
Will you take me to the water? Look, I'm having a really bad day.
You've been having a bad day for a long time. So?
Sir, I have no one to help me into the water when it's stirred up. And when I do get close, the others step down in front of me. And so,
Look at me. Look at me. That's not what I asked. I'm not asking you about who's helping you, or who's not helping, or who's getting in your way. I'm asking about you.
I've tried.
For a long time, I know. And you don't want false hope again, I understand. But this pool, it It has nothing for you. It means nothing. And you know it. But you're still here. Why?
I don't know.
You don't need this pool. You only need me. So, do you want to be healed? So let's go. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk.
I'm free to walk, like he said. Don't forget your bed.
Why does this matter?
Because you're not coming back here. That life is over. Everything changes now.
So cool. I haven't actually seen the whole show all the way through, but I thought that clip was so beautiful. There's three things that I want to highlight in this moment. I love that he asks him, he says, I'm not asking you about who's helping you or who's not helping you. I'm asking you about you. Isn't it so beautiful that the way that Jesus moves in our life is like he sees through all the smoke and mirrors. He sees through what you tell other people. When you say, oh yeah, I want better friends, but you still hang out with the same people. Yeah, I want to move past addiction, but you haven't moved away from it at all. It's still front and center in your life. I love that he asks him, he tells him, he says, I'm asking about you, not asking about everyone else. I'm asking you about you. Do you actually want to be healed? The second thing he says that's, I think, so amazing, he says, this pool, it has nothing for you. It means nothing, but you're still here. Why? And I just don't want to be asked that question anymore. I don't want Jesus to have to ask me why I'm still in a place that I know I'm not supposed to be, waiting for something that's never going to come. The distractions that we fill our lives up with, that we keep God from actually changing us because we find ourselves waiting in a place that isn't going to do anything for us. And the last thing is just that last clip when he asks, why does this matter? And he says, because you're not coming back here. That life is over. Everything changes now. Jesus doesn't just meet you in your pain or challenge your position or shift your perspective or invite your participation. He moves you towards purpose. In verse 14, a couple verses later, it says, a short time later, Jesus found this man at the temple and he said to him, look at you now, you're healed. Walk away from your sin so that nothing worse will happen to you. I love this because Jesus' intention in your life is never just to help you walk, it's to help you run. And what he knows is that the only thing worse than him going back to that pool and being crippled again, being sick again, would be living a life out of relationship with Jesus, continuing to make destructive choices and patterns that might not cripple or sicken his outer body, but will take his soul and will leave it paralyzed and crippled and blinded. And that's really what this is about, is do you want to be healed? Do you actually want to be changed? What is Jesus' intention for our life? What does it mean to live life on purpose? It means to live life on mission. It means to live life in the service of others. And when you're distracted by your own brokenness, you cannot get beyond yourself enough to actually serve other people in your life. You want to know when life matters? Life matters when you are helping change someone else's life, not desperately just looking for change in your own. Life starts to really matter when you get to make someone else's life better. And I hope that this man took the rest of his life and went back to that pool and talked with other people and told them the same thing that Jesus told him. This pool, it has nothing for you. It means nothing, but you're still here. And I hope that he helped pray over people and lead people to healing and pull them out of that situation, because it's the exact same one that he was pulled out of. That's the purpose of so much pain in our lives, is that your pain tells a story, and there's a specific group of people that are going to relate to what you've gone through, and it's going to help change their lives, because you get to say, I'm on the other side of this, and it gives hope to people. And that's so many times why we move through what we move through in life. And this is part of why I was so hesitant to give Jesus my life, was like, I thought that what God wanted was to make my life so small, was to control my life, to keep it from being what I wanted it to be. But more importantly, more than anything, I thought that no one would truly love me if they fully knew me. And in a conversation with a friend on a beach, he shared his story of how Jesus had changed his life, and I listened for 30 minutes. And I had all these questions going through my mind, and the entire time he kept answering those questions out loud in his story. And then the last thing I remember before my life was forever changed was he turned to me and he said, Peter, I don't know what you're thinking right now, but what I want you to know is that even if you never believe in God, God believes in you. And even if you never choose to follow him, he will pursue you and he will love you for the rest of your life. And my friend got up and he just did a cartwheel and started playing volleyball on the beach. And I sat there and I wept, because I was arrested by that moment. I was so compelled by the reality that what he said, if it was true, it meant that the world was going to change for me. Because if God could love me, knowing everything about me, and choose me even if I didn't choose him, then that changed everything. Most of us compartmentalize our life. We have a security lockbox in our relationships of different people that we let in on different things. And we're all terrified of the day that everyone gets together and chooses to share stories about our life, because then a group of people would know everything about us. I want you to know that if you believe that lie, that if someone knew everything about me, they wouldn't love me, that God already does. He knows every single thing about us. He knows every decision we've made. He knows everything in our past. He knows everything in your present. He knows what you think. He knows what goes on in your secret life, your private life, and your public life. And he loves you and embraces you more than anyone else ever will, ever could, ever can. That's the power of the love of Jesus, that it changes you from the inside out, and it never stops, and it never runs out. So I just want to leave you with this challenge to stand in your pain, whatever it is, to abandon your position, to let Jesus transform your perspective, to allow him to invite you to participate in your future, and to step into your purpose, to step into your calling, to step into your future. Because the life that God has planned for each and every single one of us, it's so much bigger than the life you've dreamt up for yourself. It is so much greater, and it's a life that isn't just about you. It's going to change other people. But in every area of life, we have to answer this question: do you want to be healed? And we have to tell Jesus yes if we want him to fully be able to use us. If you want to look back at your life in 50, 60, 70 years and say, yeah, that was worth it. Because we should not be waiting for life after death. There is life before death. And it's what Jesus died to give us. It's to be fully and truly alive, and to be fully and truly known. It's to be fully and truly free. Jesus, I thank you so much for this time. And I just ask that as we move into our week, that you would just continue conversations going on in our own hearts, in our own relationships, and our friendships. And that you would just challenge each and every single one of us to respond to this question that you ask us at different points of our life of, do you want to be healed? And I pray that we would, and ask that we would have the courage to answer yes. And to not just answer with yes, but to participate in that act of healing, to participate in the amazing things that you want to do inside of our lives. I ask that you would challenge our ideas about you and who you are, that you would move us towards community, that you would move us towards friendship, that you would move us towards purpose. And I ask that along every step of the way, we would not get stuck in a position that limits us, that we would not allow our perspective to become small, that we would not allow our pain to cripple us, that we would not say no to you so that you have to ask somebody else. I pray that you would reveal aspects of each and every single one of our purposes, our destinies, what you were calling us to, what you've made us for, and that we would begin to walk in that more and more as we move through 2024. Pray that your love would transform us, that it would continue to change us from the inside out as we move to change other people's lives as well. I pray this in Jesus' name.